Download this code from codegive.com, link in the description below. Creating a private Kubernetes cluster on Amazon EKS, Elastic Kubernetes Service, involves several steps, including setting up your AWS environment, creating the EKS cluster, and configuring access to it. Below is an informative tutorial that covers these steps in detail, along with code examples. Prerequisites. 1. AWS account. Ensure you have an AWS account. 2. AWS CLI. Install and configure the AWS command line interface, CLI. 3. kubectl. Install the Kubernetes command line tool. 4. eksctl. Install eksctl, a CLI tool for creating EKS clusters. Step 1. Install AWS CLI, kubectl, and eksctl. You can install these tools using package managers depending on your OS. Here are some examples. For Mac OS, using homebrew. Bash. Brew. Install awscli kubectl eksctl. For Ubuntu. Bash. Install AWS CLI. Sudo apt-get update. Sudo apt-get install awscli y. Install kubectl. Sudo snap install kubectl classic. Install eksctl. curl location https://getup.com/weaveworks/eksctl/latest/downloads/exctl_amd64.tar.gz tar/xzc/tmp sudo mv/tmp/exctl/usr/local/bin. Step 2. Configure AWS CLI. Configure the AWS CLI with your credentials. Bash. AWS configure. You will be prompted to provide AWS access key ID, AWS secret access key, default region name, example US West 2, default output format, example JSON. Step 3. Create a VPC for the private EKS cluster. A private EKS cluster requires a custom VPC. Here's how to create one using eksctl. Bash. Eksctl create cluster / name my private cluster / region US West 2 / VPC private subnets equals subnet xxxxxxxx subnet yyyyyyyy / VPC public subnets equals subnet zzzzzzzzz / node private networking. Step 4. Create the private EKS cluster. You can create a private EKS cluster using the following command. This command will create a cluster with private nodes and no public access. Bash. Eksctl create cluster / name my private cluster / region US West 2 / node private networking / VPC private subnets equals subnet xxxxxxxx subnet yyyyyyyy / VPC public subnets equals subnet zzzzzzzzz / node type t3.medium / nodes 3 / managed. Explanation. Name, name of your EKS cluster. Region, AWS region where you want to deploy your cluster. Node private networking, ensures that nodes are placed in private subnets only. VPC private subnets, specify your private subnets. Ensure these subnets exist in your VPC. VPC public subnets, specify public subnets, optional. Node type, type of EC2 instances for your nodes. Nodes, number of worker nodes. Managed, create a managed node group. Step 5, update kubeconfig. After the cluster is created, update your kubeconfig file to use the new cluster. bash. AWS X region US West 2 update kubectl name my private cluster. Step 6, verify the cluster. Verify that your cluster is up and running. Bash. Kubectl get nodes. You should see the nodes listed, indicating that your cluster is operational. Step 7, accessing the private cluster. Since the cluster is private, you might need a VPN connection, AWS Direct Connect, or a Bastion host to access it. If you're using a Bastion host, you can SSH into it and use kubectl from there. Step 8, deploy applications. You can deploy applications to your private EKS cluster using standard Kubernetes manifests. For example, to deploy a simple Nginx application. YAML. API version, apt/v1. Kind, deployment. Metadata. Name, Nginx deployment. Spec. Replicas, 2. Selector. Match labels. App, Nginx. Template. Metadata. Labels. App, Nginx. Spec. Containers. Name, Nginx. Image, Nginx 1.14.2. Ports. Container port, 80. Dash. API version, v1. Kind, service. Metadata. Name, Nginx service. Spec. Type, cluster IP. Selector. App, Nginx. Ports. Port, 80. Target port, 80. Apply it using bash. Kubectl apply fnginx deployment.yaml. Step 9, clean up. When you're done, you can delete the EKS cluster and associated resources. Bash. Eksctl delete cluster name my private cluster region US West 2. Conclusion. You have successfully created a private Kubernetes cluster on AWS EKS. This setup allows you to run Kubernetes workloads without exposing your nodes to the public internet, enhancing security. You can further configure your cluster with IAM roles, security groups, and network policies as needed. Feel free to ask if you have any specific questions or need further assistance.